about your work as a human rights lawyer and your career. Give us a brief synopsis of what that's been like and some of the other things you've worked on.
Sure. Thank you for having me. I went to law school in 1988, a long time ago, graduated in 1991. I always went with the idea of doing human rights work when I got out. And my first job was representing indigent children in the District of Columbia, in the capital of the United States, who were accused of crimes. Did that for a few years, and then I went into private practice and did mostly criminal defense work, which in the United States, people understand the Black Lives Matter movement and our criminal justice system. Yeah. Criminal defense work for people who don't have money is very political here. It is human rights work, and I think it's international dimension. So, I was always a human rights lawyer. While I was doing that work, I on a parallel track got involved in Ecuador, and really one of the most vivid illustrations in my mind of environmental racism in a legal case where, Texas, while Chevron had dumped billions of gallons of toxic waste, into the ancestral lands of indigenous groups, and the kind of thing you would never see, or at least hope to see, in the United States or the UK, or, but in Ecuador, it was like, it's just how they did it. They had no regard for the people. So I've been involved in that case for a number of years, and I'm a human rights advocate through and through, and I've been doing this work my whole life. Yeah. So I'm very committed to human rights law. I'm committed to it on a practical level. Like, I like to make cases happen that can help people on the ground, and I also am very interested in it on a policy level. With the dimensions of it, the law, the movement toward ecocide, adopting a new international crime. So there's a lot of things going on a lot of levels, and I'm very engaged in these issues.
And because I know the Ecuador pollution case, that was sort of going on, stretching back into the 70s, wasn't it, when they were drilling in the country? When did you first become aware of it and sort of decide, okay, I need to take this on, I need to get involved here?
Well, the problem in Ecuador began in the 1960s and got worse in the 70s and 80s when, Texaco went in, and, this was not an accident. This is the Amazon Chernobyl. I mean, this was a deliberate mass industrial poisoning. That's what I call it. And that's what it was, in my view, where they deliberately dumped toxic waste as a cost-saving measure, clearly knowing, it was clearly foreseeable that it would destroy indigenous cultures and probably kill a lot of people because of exposures to the toxins from cancer and other diseases. And that's exactly what has happened over the years. I first went there in April of 1993 as part of a much larger team of lawyers and investigators to examine reports that this had happened. And that first trip was just completely shocking. I mean, there were large pools of oil in the jungle that had just been dumped there by Texaco, and there was oil all along the roads, and it was very clear that the people who lived there couldn't function without being exposed multiple times daily to toxins, in the water they drank and the food they ate, the air that they were breathing. There was no respite from this. I mean, even for us, during the few days we were there, we were being exposed. So it was a horrendous situation. It was made worse by the fact that we knew that Texaco had deliberately made a choice to do it this way. Again, it was like an accident, like the BP spill in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010, as bad as that was, and as responsible as BP was for that calamity, was still an accident. They did not intend for that to happen. Whereas in Ecuador, Texaco intended for the dumping to take place, thinking they could get away with it. So, I've been involved since the early 1990s in this case. I want to be clear, there's a lot of lawyers who've been involved in this case. I'm one of many. Yeah. It's not the case. It's the case of the affected communities in Ecuador who have several lawyers helping them. I'm one of them. And, I think because of my, I played a very instrumental role, I think, in a lot of areas over the years. Chevron decided to target me in particular, but I'm not the only lawyer targeted by Chevron because of our work on this case.
I was going to say, because, when you're going into a case with a company like Chevron that has the resources, to maybe fight back against this sort of case and then come back on you, is that something you think about, when you're taking this on? Is that a concern in the first place? Or how do you deal with that, when you're going through the process?
I never had a concern that I would be attacked in this way. I couldn't have anticipated it. It's never happened before in the United States, and I think it's unethical and frankly illegal.
Yeah.
So, and I also think it involves some very dark forces in Chevron and in the fossil fuel industry that have captured parts of the U.S. federal judiciary. So, no, I did not anticipate this happening to the extent that it has. I mean, obviously, you litigate. You don't expect the other side to just lay down and give up. They're going to fight. We fight. But you fight within the context of a court proceeding adhering to the law. They went outside of that and began to attack me in a PR campaign, a demonization campaign. They paid a witness $2 million to come up and tell a lie that I was in a meeting where I supposedly offered a bribe to the Ecuador trial judge, completely false. That's been rejected by 29 appellate judges in Ecuador and Canada. So they were doing things that were stunning to me. I mean, were astonishing, that were scary. And it's led to an unfortunate situation now where I've been under house arrest now in the United States in my apartment in New York for almost 600 days on a misdemeanor criminal contempt charge brought by a judge who has a real bias against me and in favor of Chevron. His name is Louis A. Kaplan. He used to be a tobacco lawyer, and he is the one who let Chevron, bring in this paid witness into his courtroom. And even though the witness admitted he was being paid, and he admitted he had been coached for 53 days by Chevron's lawyers before he put in this false testimony, even though he later recanted almost every element of his testimony, Judge Kaplan still credits what he said, even though, again, it's been rejected by judges all over the world. And he uses that as a way to let Chevron continue to attack me and my family here in New York. While, again, in Ecuador, Canada, and other places, courts have ruled otherwise. So it's a very difficult personal situation, but it doesn't take away from the fact that the big picture is the Ecuadorian communities have won the case, that, we've been enormously successful, and they plan on enforcing their judgment against Chevron's assets in other countries. I do want to mention one other thing that's highly unusual and I think frightening, and everybody needs to understand this. When a judge charges a lawyer in the United States with contempt of court, basically he's charging me with disobeying his court order. I want to explain what happened. He ordered me to turn over all my confidential case information to Chevron, my computer, my cell phone, among this material. And I have ethical obligations as a lawyer that violates attorney-client privilege. And I believe it would have put the lives of many of my clients in Ecuador in grave danger for various reasons. So I asked Judge Kaplan to let me appeal his order. And he kept dithering for months while Chevron was attacking me. And he finally, granted my request to hold me in civil contempt, which allowed me a direct appeal to the Second Circuit, which is the federal appellate court in New York. This was way back in May of 2019. I recently, 2 weeks ago, I ended up appealing, and I recently won that appeal. But while the appeal was pending, he charged me with criminal contempt for supposedly not complying with an order that I turned over my computer and cell phone while I was appealing the order, which never happens. It's never happened before in the United States. It's very, it's discourteous at a minimum, but it's like it's like an ambush, really. A judicial ambush is probably the best way to describe it, as a way to lock me up. And the other thing I want to add is his charges against me, these contempt charges, were rejected by the regular federal prosecutor. He brought them to the prosecutor. They wouldn't charge me. So he then appointed a private law firm called Seward and Kissel. It's a New York law firm, to prosecute me in the name of the people. But he hid the fact. I found this out several months later after I'd been detained at home. Seward and Kissel had Chevron as a client. Okay, so being prosecuted by a private Chevron law firm in a case where the regular prosecutor declined to prosecute. There are a lot of features of what I'm going through that are very problematic, that among them. And the other thing Judge Kaplan did is, rather than let the case be assigned randomly, which is required by rules in New York, he assigned the judge to preside. She's the one who locked me up. And it so happens she's a leader of a group here in the United States called the Federalist Society, which is a pro-corporate legal professional organization to which none other than Chevron is a major donor.
Wow. I mean,
And so you basically have my judge is connected, financially linked to Chevron, the prosecutor's financially linked to Chevron, and Judge Kaplan, who charged me as investments in a mutual fund that's invested in Chevron. So all three people driving this have financial links to Chevron. Now, how can that be? As a person accused, I have a right to an unbiased judge, a neutral fact finder. I'm not getting either of those. They're denying me a jury. It's the whole point of this exercise, I believe, is to drive me into prison.
But when what's your, because it seems obvious that there's, multiple conflicts of interest, and that the judge seems compromised, and, based on everything you've just said, but who do you go to when that happens? Where's your recourse to say, well, if you're bringing all this information, and I know some of it's already in the public domain, but how can you take that on then and be like, this is unsafe? Like, is there another court you can appeal to? What do you do next?
I'm appealing to the court of public opinion, because it's very clear that the appellate court in New York, although I respect the rule of law and I respect the process we have in this country, and generally it works, it's just not working in this situation. But that court has not really checked Judge Kaplan's abuse of power, or Judge Preska's abuse of power, or the Seward and Kissel, the prosecutor's name is Rita Glademan, what she's doing. And they're all working together. They're all talking, and they're colluding to keep me locked up and then to put me in prison. I have a trial May 10th, and people need to pay attention to this trial. It will not be a fair trial, but we will do our best under the circumstances, and people can listen in. But the larger issue is, the only way that I'm going to be protected is if the U.S. Department of Justice, that is the regular prosecutorial authority, takes the case back from this private Chevron law firm and prosecutes me directly as a professional body that's disinterested. That's my legal right. That's how 99.9% of cases happen in the United States. And if that were to happen, I don't believe I'd be locked up. I think they'd probably dismiss the case, or it would end, through some mechanism. But to sit here and keep me detained at home on a misdemeanor, I've been here almost 600 days in a case where, if I were to be convicted, the maximum sentence that could be imposed is 180 days. Really? The maximum sentence ever imposed for this charge on a lawyer in New York is 90 days of home confinement. I've already been here over 6 times that. Wow. And I haven't had a trial. Yeah. So there's something going on here that is deeply disturbing. I think it's bigger than me, and I think it's designed, honestly, by the fossil fuel industry and the allies in our federal judiciary to try to intimidate human rights lawyers into not doing this very important work, which is critically necessary to hold polluters accountable and ultimately to save the planet. Because this type of work, as I'm sure you know, is intimately connected to the survival of the planet and dealing with the issue of global warming.
Yeah. And could you just explain a bit, going back, the original ruling in Ecuador, what is it, between the two jurisdictions with the US, like how Chevron is able to just sort of, pull all of its assets out of the country and then get to the point where they're now taking you to court in the US and ignore the original ruling in Ecuador,
Well, you got to understand how this all went down. The Ecuadorians wanted the case in U.S. courts originally, so it was filed. It was filed in New York in 1993. Chevron then fought for 10 years to move it to Ecuador, praising Ecuador's courts the whole time. These are great courts. They're fair. They can adjudicate this. Chevron won that battle. Got the case sent to Ecuador. I think they thought we would disappear, but the Ecuadorians kept going. There was an Ecuadorian team of lawyers that pushed this case and did great work. And once back in Ecuador, Chevron realized it would lose the case based on the evidence and started attacking me and attacking the lawyers and attacking Ecuador's judicial system. And they did that through public relations, press releases, trying to plant articles. But ultimately, they came back to the U.S. court, the same court the Ecuadorians wanted the original case in, when Chevron said, no, this court, we can't do the case in the U.S. They came back to that court to attack Ecuadorian courts where they had insisted the trial be held, and where they had accepted jurisdiction. I mean, this is the ultimate in forum shopping, right? What's shocking is not that they tried, although I'm bothered by it. What's shocking is that Judge Kaplan let them do it, embraced the strategy, and then took it upon himself to help, these hundreds of lawyers that Chevron was using at the New York law firm Gibson, Dunn and Crutcher, to help them facilitate this wholesale attack on the lawyers and on the Ecuadorian judicial system, even though Chevron wanted the case heard in Ecuador, praised Ecuador's courts, and Ecuador's courts had fairly adjudicated the case, and it was affirmed on appeal by Ecuador's Supreme Court. So, if you take a step back, I ask people to think about this. You have one U.S. trial judge, the lowest level trial judge in our federal system, who essentially ruled without a jury, without looking at any of the environmental evidence that was presented in Ecuador that the Ecuadorian courts relied on to find Chevron liable. He tried to overturn Ecuador's entire court system, including a decision by the country's Supreme Court from his trial court in Manhattan. What gives a U.S. judge the notion in his or her head to think they could even do this? It's never been done before in any country. And can you imagine, just for purposes of argument, if an Ecuadorian trial judge did the same to the U.S. Supreme Court or tried to? People would laugh.
Yeah.
Well, what's really disturbing is when a U.S. judge does it to another sovereign nation's Supreme Court, a U.S. trial judge. Like, a lot of people here in the United States think maybe he's onto something. I mean, they give this one U.S. judge more inherent credibility than the collective wisdom and credibility of the 29 appellate judges in Ecuador and Canada who've affirmed the judgment.
Yeah.
The bottom line is this is a legit judgment affirmed through the proper processes of multiple countries. We just have this one trial judge who's attacking the judgment to help Chevron and to try to keep me detained so I can't work on enforcing the judgment.
And are they, because you would represent about 30,000 individuals, right, in the original case, are they still trying to get the original judgment upheld against Chevron? You mentioned they have other legal teams as well. Is that all still going on in the background as well as this is happening to you?
That's an extremely important point. There's me and there's the case, and they're not the same.
Yeah.
What's happening to me is, I think, important, obviously, to me and my family, but also to everyone who cares about this kind of work. And I need to be protected to the extent I can be. So I ask for people's support to the extent you can do it. Public support, donations on the website, which, by the way, is donzigerdefense.com. But more to the point is the larger case, which is the judgment itself, which is owned by the communities of Ecuador. It's not my judgment. It's not my case. It's their case. They have other teams of lawyers in different countries exploring options to bring lawsuits to force Chevron to enforce their judgment and force Chevron to comply with the rule of law and pay what they owe to the people of Ecuador so they can clean up the pollution that Chevron left, the billions of gallons of toxic oil waste that was dumped on their lands. So they're two different things. They're connected, obviously, but the larger case will be going forward no matter what happens to me. And I think that's an important point.
Isn't there any, in terms of like international recourse, either through other human rights organizations or through other law associations that can, pick this up and provide support? I don't know, through an international court in some way. Is there any option for that?
There's many options. The United States court system generally tends to not pay much attention to international courts. Other countries pay much more attention. There's a real arrogance ingrained, I think, in the legal culture in our judiciary, which is unfortunate. Not with everybody, but with many judges. There have been some efforts before various international bodies to help, and hopefully they will help. I mean, several international human rights groups have gotten very involved in trying to protect me, including Amnesty International, Global Witness, Greenpeace, and others. And they signed a letter. 13 of these groups signed a letter to the new U.S. Attorney General, asking him to get involved and review the case and take it back from the private Chevron law firm that's prosecuting me. So, I've gotten a lot of support. Also, 55 Nobel laureates have signed a statement demanding my release and dismissal of the charges. So I've gotten a lot of support, but I need more support. And judges in the United States at the federal level have, unfortunately, there's very little accountability. I mean, they just seem to keep going. But I think ultimately, if all this stuff starts working together, we're going to stand a fighting chance of getting through this in a way where my rights can be protected and the rights of the people of Ecuador who've been harmed for so many years can be protected.
How can organizations like the Arrested Lawyers Initiative or, other bar associations in any, country around the world, if they wanted to get involved and help, how can they support you?
Well, I think there's various ways. I mean, one is publicize my plight, publicize this case, put it on your website, get your supporters to understand what's happening, to watch this interview. Number two is for individuals who want to help me, please go to my website, donzigerdefense.com. If you can give a little bit of money, that would be great. This is enormously expensive. We need resources to deal with these attacks. I have lawyers that need to be paid and expenses that need to be paid. I can't earn a living while I'm locked up. So please go to the website. Even if you can't give, I know these are difficult times for many, you can still sign up and get our newsletter. And then to the extent Arrested Lawyers, the network can think of ideas to maybe write a letter to the Attorney General or just call attention to what I think is a real flaw or failure in the normal functioning of the U.S. federal system. That would be very helpful.
And how do you? It sounds like it's taken, obviously quite a personal toll on, I'm sure, on your family as well and just your general life. How do you still, you still sound determined to fight this and stand up for yourself and what you've been through? How do you, stay so positive and determined for wanting to see this through?
In a way, my life is now the property of the gods. I can't explain it. I cannot completely control the outcome. And it's very obviously frustrating, but you have to surrender to reality. I'm doing all I possibly can to get through this. Remain hopeful and optimistic. I have a 14-year-old son and a spouse, a wife. I have no choice but to keep pushing, and I'm very determined to get through this. I mean, I'm not unrealistic either. We're up against a lot of power, and I get that they're trying to crush me, but I'm really hoping that the gods, meaning people like Arrested Lawyers and Amnesty International and the Nobel laureates and all the lawyers and legal groups that have stepped up to support me and support the Ecuadorians. I'm hoping all of that will get me through this, and more importantly, get the Ecuadorians the compensation they have won in court to clean up the pollution Chevron caused, such that lives can be saved. So, even though it's difficult, I am resilient, I am strong, and I'm hopeful.
And I guess just finally, has the Court of Appeal decision you mentioned earlier, has that made you a bit more optimistic for going to trial in May? How do they relate?
We won an enormous victory in the Court of Appeals that they tossed the key contempt finding against me. And I've been saying this for 2 or 3 years. This finding was illegitimate, and we won that. While I was locked up, we actually appealed it and argued it from my house. So that's a huge victory. That gives me confidence. I want to believe there are judges who are really looking at this, and I'm getting the feeling some are increasingly bothered by what's happening to me. So we'll see how it goes. The trial, I'm confident we will put on a great defense, but again, I want to be clear, I do not have a neutral fact finder. I do not have a jury of my peers. I'm being, the judge is the jury. It's the same person, unfortunately, and I think that's wrong. And she's, linked to Chevron, and she's the one who's obviously prejudged my guilt. That's why one of the reasons why she's locked me up now for almost 600 days, which again is unprecedented. And I'll say, as we kind of near the end of this interview. There's never been another individual in U.S. history charged with a federal misdemeanor with no criminal record. That's me, locked up for even 1 day prior to trial. And I'm, March 28th, it's going to be 600 days. So this is improper. It's bizarre. It's unprecedented. And it's, in my mind, dark. And people need to pay attention to this, learn about it, and try to protect both me and the principles we all care about, which is a fair and open and unbiased judiciary.
Is there a concern that, if, you do lose the case, that this will set a worrying precedent for lawyers to find themselves in a similar situation in future?
I think, let me be clear. I think this is a new playbook by the fossil fuel industry and maybe by other corporations to inflict on critics who are maybe a little too successful at calling out their wrongdoing, their pollution, or their corruption. I mean, you don't see this because most cases don't ever get as far as ours has gotten. But they're sort of holding this playbook back and testing it out on me, in my view, to see if they can get away with it. And if they get away with it, I promise you they will be using it against other advocates who are successful and holding them accountable.
Okay, well, no, thanks for I think that's good, Stephen. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. I'd like to, if possible, is there a way, will the trial be broadcast in a way that I can ask for access remotely for press?
Yes.
I'm not sure how it's, because I know in the UK at the moment, that's the way, I mean, obviously because of the pandemic situation, that's the way we're doing it, but is that possible for me to access in the US if I can keep an eye on things?
As I understand it, you can access the trial, the audio portion of the trial, from any place in the world. There's a number you can call into, and you can listen. And we are going to be asking people to listen to the trial. We want people to bear witness to a trial process that we fear will not be fair.
Yeah, no, I'd certainly like to keep in touch and keep an eye on things. And from a UK perspective, I know like our newspaper will be very interested in seeing how it goes. How long is the trial expected to last,
It just depends. Okay. We don't know. Probably 1 to 2 weeks is my guess.
Yeah. Okay. Well, no, thanks again for speaking to me. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I really wish you good luck.
Thank you very much for having me, and thanks to everyone who's going to listen to this and get involved. Thank you in advance. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, take care, Stephen. Enjoy the rest of your weekend if you can.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye. Bye.